feel like we need some music or something, like
elevator music.
Doesn't Encounter have a theme song or something at the beginning?
Dylan, now's your chance to transition to music.
I'm a great appreciator of music, but that's where it ends, unfortunately. But we could.
So maybe you can share your playlist, and then we can just listen to it.
Oh wow, that's even more pressure because now it's like
now we're judging you. All right. I think we're going to leave we'll leave the after party for after the session, but I think we're now live on Zoom, live on Facebook, and I believe we have folks joining us on YouTube as well. So let's get started, I guess. So welcome to everybody who's joining us today for this Encounters talk about why to choose VR for nonfiction storytelling. Very, very excited to be joined today by three very, very incredible storytellers, artists, and virtual reality connoisseurs now. And so really excited to pick their brains on this really great topic. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This panel is going to be quite conversational. So I'm going to kick us off just with a little bit of background, some industry info, and then we'll hear from our really wonderful guests in a kind of Q&A format. And then sort of towards the end of the session, anybody who is joining us now, either via Zoom or various Encounters social channels, please do feel free to leave any questions in the Q&A section or in the chats, and we'll be moderating those questions. So if you have anything you want to know from any of our guests, please feel free to engage, and we'll get to those questions later in this session. Cool. So I guess I'll just get started with a little bit of background information about myself. So my name is Caitlin, and I'm a producer. I've spent some time running an artist lab at the nonprofit incubator Electric South with the goal of cultivating new media storytelling across Africa. And in my time there, I had the really tremendous privilege of working with each of the really great artists that we have with us on this call today, and each on their very first foray into the world of XR. So today we're going to be kind of exploring their work, both in XR and beyond, and sort of unpacking this medium, what it offers, and sort of where it's going, and really specifically why it's interesting for storytelling. I'm not going to go into too much information about what VR or AR or XR or these various new forms of reality specifically are on a technical level, but just as an intro, it's sort of a broad category. It encompasses virtual and augmented reality, and it's got kind of overlapping edges with worlds like film and gaming and other industries. Generally, what I'm talking about is bringing content into the physical world around you, or you being immersed in another world. So typically this is going to happen through some kind of technological intermediary, which would be like a VR headset, like I've got here, it's a Oculus Quest, or an augmented reality app on your phone, and then there's other formats as well. And I think there's been a lot of excitement and investment in XR because it's likely the future of computing. Sort of the next big shift in human life and how we interact with our technologies. But my interest in this is primarily in storytelling through this new medium. And I guess what's really extraordinary about it is that we're seeing that artists are building this technology and the vernacular of it alongside programmers and investors. Which brings me to the very, very wonderful, illustrious guests that we have today. Between the three of them, their work has won the Best Digital Narrative at Sheffield DocFest. It's been listed in Forbes as one of the best 50 XR experiences of 2019, and premiered this year at the Sundance Film Festival. So really some extraordinary talent on this chat today. So I'm going to give an introduction to our artists today, Jumoke, Nyasha, and Dylan. I'm going to talk about them one at a time and show you a little sneak peek of their work in VR, and let them talk a bit about their projects. So first up, we have Nyasha, who's a Zimbabwean director and cinematographer. She focuses on visually documenting a broad spectrum of subjects, including breaking news, climate change, education, migration, health, conflict, also in various parts of Africa. She holds a master's degree in journalism and documentary filmmaking from Columbia Journalism School. In 2015, she directed the award-winning documentary Through the Fire about a recovering drug user facing the demons of his past, which premiered at Doc NYC and won the Audience Choice Documentary Short Award at the Atlanta DocuFest. Her short doc Queens and Knights, about an all-inclusive rugby team, won first prize at the 2016 NBC Sports Film Contest. Last year, she filmed and produced Sex and the Sugar Daddy, multimedia piece on transactional sex relationships in Kenya, which was a finalist for the One World Media Awards. She's extraordinary, as you can obviously tell. Most recently, she directed a feature broadcast documentary, Imported for My Body, which is a culmination of a year-long investigation that uncovers an illegal network that traffics African women to India and a life of sexual exploitation for BBC Africa Eye. So really, what a really extraordinary person. Nyasha created a VR project called Le Lac, shot at Lake Chad. And I am very excited to share a little trailer with you all. Now, 1 second, I will just be sharing my screen with you.
They call me Le Lac. These days, something is not quite right. I am not sure what is going on with me, but whatever it is, I don't like it.
Jill, it's amazing. So Nyasha, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm sorry for sending you the long version of that bio. I didn't think it was all going to be read out.
I think it's worth it. I mean, I think it really speaks to both the breadth of your experience as a journalist and as a storyteller, but also the types of stories that you're really interested in telling. I was wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the project Le Lac. What is the story and why is it important for you to tell this story? And then why did you choose VR as the medium for it?
Okay. So Le Lac is the personified journey of Lake Chad, which was one of the biggest lakes in Africa that's shrunk significantly over the last 50 years to about 10% of its size. And I wanted to tell the story of what was happening in terms of the environmental degradation, but also what was happening in regards to the Boko Haram conflict to the people around the lake. And I thought it would be interesting to tell it from the perspective of the lake itself as a character versus telling it from an individual who is living on the lake or around it, and have her sort of project the feelings of what it's like to be disappearing, to no longer be as significant as one was, the feeling of loss, the feeling of being attached to the people, and provide for the people that have lived around you for so long.
It's extraordinary.
And I think in terms of why VR, I think this was quite ignorant, not knowing what was happening in the Lake Chad Basin. I thought, I realized there wasn't that much. Lake Chad is a really hard place to get to. You can attest to the troubles of the second time to do the actual shooting of the project. It's not easy, mostly because of insecurity and just like general logistics coming from East Africa. So I thought it was important to do a story that really brought people as close to the place as possible. And when you look at traditional linear video or photography, I just didn't feel that medium sufficed being able to, and it's also so beautiful there, despite all of the turmoil that's going around. And so I thought VR would be the best mechanism to bring people to this place and to educate and inform people about what was happening.
Yeah, you definitely bring up a lot of interesting conversation points, which we're going to unpack more today, both about production and the difficulties that we can certainly face telling true stories in context in spaces that aren't easy to get into, and then how using a very immersive medium can help bring people into it. There's a lot of parallels there with the work by our other creators today. I'm just going to introduce them as well before we dive more into these juicy topics. So next up on our list, we have Dylan Valley, who is an award-winning documentary filmmaker who views film as a liberatory tool. He's currently lecturing at the Center for Film and Media Studies at UCT. He's also a PhD candidate in media studies at the University of Witwatersrand in Joburg. In 2013, he received a Pulitzer Fellowship from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and he also did his master's in specialized journalism there. His thesis documentary was on the groundbreaking web series The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl by Issa Rae. And this year, his virtual reality documentary film Azibuye premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. So I will show you all a sneak peek of Azibuye.
South Africa is a very rich country. It's got mineral wealth, it's got human resources, it's got infrastructure. That has been the back on which they've managed to provide very substandard housing in the outskirts of the cities. But what we are saying here is that actually, fuck this. Here's land sitting in the city. Let's take it. And that's what we've done.
There we have it. So Dylan, tell us, what is Azibuye and how does it, fit into your work as a documentary filmmaker?
Thanks, Caitlin. Thanks for that introduction. It's Azibuye is a film about a housing auction in Joburg, as you saw in the clip there, and it's really also occupation is seeking to start a conversation about the land issue in South Africa, also issues around decolonization and colonialism. So the film is really a journey of this occupation that's taken place in this abandoned mansion in an affluent part in Johannesburg. And yeah, it's a 360 doc. Is that enough? Or did I say more?
No, that's great. That's great. And why was it really important for you to tell this story?
So yeah, it was really important. I felt it was important to tell the story because I was kind of close to the story in that I already knew Marcelo and Ivan, who were occupying the house personally. And I had the opportunity to make a 360 documentary, and I felt like the medium would do well in that space particularly. And I just felt like I really wanted to do, for a long time I'd been wanting to do something about land in South Africa because it'd been quite clear that was like the main conversation that was urgent at the time before COVID-19 hit. I mean, it'll still be a major issue going forward. And I just didn't know how to approach the conversation. So through this occupation, I was able to actually like do my own research into land redistribution, think about things like occupation as an alternative way of redistribution, self-organizing instead of looking at government solutions. So did all of that in this one story. So that's why I thought it would be a great story to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it shows in the way that you've really been able to kind of both kind of push what the medium can do and also like unpack these really, really specific characters' stories and kind of merge those two things. Our third fabulous artist we have on this panel today is Chimoke Sano. Chimoke is a visual storyteller and cultural interlocutor from Lagos. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in English Studies from Nigeria. And as an artist, she's working primarily in photography, video art, and virtual reality, reflecting on self-perception and separation experienced through time and space while rethinking and engaging in the discourse on post-colonial societies and decolonization. Her conceptual framework and process are largely informed by global localization, or GLOCAL, with a local approach to engagement and storytelling, where individual cultures, histories, and traditions are presented as independent frames within this global picture. She began exploring extended reality in 2017, where she was part of Electric South's New Dimension workshop. And she's directed Lagos at Large, which is this immersive nonfiction piece, which I'm excited to share a trailer with you shortly. That premiered at IDFA in 2019. And her functional summary includes exhibitions in Nigeria, Chad, Ghana, South Africa, Sudan, Ethiopia, Malawi, Benin, the US, Canada, Italy, Germany, Netherlands, Brussels, and the UAE. So, Jumoke, I feel like I could have actually rather just listed places you haven't presented your work than all these places you have. It's really an extraordinary body of work. I will share our third trailer for today, which is Lagos at Large.
Lagos beckoned me, said I should come find true love. Lagos never whispers. 9 years of shouting.
Here we go. So just a sneak peek, but exciting stuff. Jumoke, tell us about the project and what it means to you. Why VR?
Thank you very much, Katie. I think my connection to VR, and I think the most of extended reality is based on the fact that I find some sort of similarities between using the medium as a means of storytelling and how storytelling was done traditionally, in the Yoruba culture. So that's one of the things that drew me to it. I looked at this idea of transcending time and space, this idea of being able to sort of tell stories where the storyteller is like right in the middle. These are some of the things that actually drew me, to begin to think about using extended reality. With Lagos at Large in particular, I think I was very much interested in, it's an ode to the city of Lagos, because it's a city that is very, there's an element, there's a history, which is our colonial past. There's a post-colonial narrative as well. There's also this kinetic energy, that I felt, I've not been able to document using photography or using other medium. And that's why, that's one of the things that actually drew me into, taking some of the sound, elements, from the city and being able to kind of create it as an experience. So those are some of the things that drew me into it. Now, the story of Lagos at Large is basically the story of Njideka, a Nigerian in diaspora who is looking to come back into the city. And it was, for me, an interesting way to kind of switch the gaze, and looking at how to gaze almost like there's like a distance in the gazing, but there's also in a way, when you're gazing from a distance, there's also sort of like that rose-tinted narrative as well, where, yes, you're seeing what's going on, but also there's a bit of a distance in your engagement with the city. So, and I wanted to, and that was reminiscent of the way that I looked at the city growing up. I was born in the city of Lagos, but then I had to move out at some point. And we would always coming, intermittently into the city. And that in itself gave me like this sort of, I was in it, but then I was also sort of distant. So that's some of the reasons why, it was important to sort of tell that story. So while I'm actually sort of engaging the everydayness, of the city, and Njideka is taking us on this journey, we're also sort of delving into complex issues, of gentrification, of the inherent classism in the city of Lagos, and also what to do with our colonial history, the architecture and the remnants of such evidence, in the city, and we don't actually know what to do with it. So I think in unpacking, this sort of very complex issues, there's also sort of like that element of playfulness as well, which is very synonymous with the city of Lagos. Lagos is not a very, when you go in there, there's not that element of seriousness. There's an element of playfulness and people are always having fun. So it's very important to sort of communicate that, using the medium, and that's where, the infusion of the music, sort of like the vibrancy, the colors, but at the same time, using all of those elements, to kind of tell the deeper story of what it is to live in a post-colonial society.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's very interesting is that you have a previous relationship with Lagos as a sense of home. And if I contrast that to maybe Nyasha's experience in Chad, which is very much stepping into an environment that, as you say, is inaccessible and is a totally new space. What's interesting about the world of VR is place becomes very important, and your lens, instead of sort of being convergent, looking inwards, towards a 2D screen, is quite, convex. You're kind of looking outwards towards, the world and the environment that becomes that much more necessary. So I'd love to I'll ask you more about your story of Njideka character. She's moving through these spaces. How do you think about the built environment as well, and that in VR?
Okay, so what I did was I tried to use a lot of the architecture as metaphors. You after the experience, you are situated by a bridge. To actually take that element of the connection that a bridge affords, but also kind of like the distance that it creates. And what I did was I tried to sort of operate in those elements. Also, there's a very interesting divide in the city in terms of location, which is like geographical divide. Lagos is divided into the island and the mainland. Island, is kind of like, the elite, sort of like it used to be the colonial quarters and colonial administrative. That's where all the administration colonial is sort of like where, so there's that sort of mobility, sort of like and I wanted to reflect that, using the architecture. So I started from the space of, because sort of as a way to sort of to become upwardly mobile, to sort of improve their loss socioeconomically. So that was like a starting point, where that's what draws people to Lagos. I also used sort of like the bus terminal as well. Also like people showing their arrival, people, I use the two bus terminals. You have Social D as well, who also kind of just show that connection between space and also connection between space people, and the city. So I try to, in a way, because it's such a short media to tell the story. I mean, the story is less than 10 minutes. So it's kind of like trying to use all of these many elements, to, in a way, tell a deeper story, So you have, for example, I try to use the Molue, bus, which is being gentrified, out of a transport system, as a way to also show how, a lot of the people are being pushed out, of the city, as the city is rapidly urbanizing. So I try to kind of take all of this use elements, as metaphors to kind of get into sort of like the deeper story of the city. But I also know that, it was a bit tricky for me shooting, for example, in a very, crowded space, especially, to positioning the camera and having to move out of, view and things like that. But also, I think it was actually nerve-wracking, for the production team, because they were many times worried that someone was going to knock the camera over, or something terrible was going to happen. But so in a way, we tried, as much as possible to get the sense and the presence, so we're situating the viewer right in the middle of activity with the space and the architecture as part of also utilizing it as a tool of storytelling as well.
Mm. Yeah. So I guess building on this idea of how do you construct a place and how do you build a world for an audience that hasn't been there? Nyasha, I know that you primarily shot most of Le Lac yourself. And you, as you were kind of exploring this new terrain, and kind of the investigative journalist in you is kind of unpacking what this world is. how are you thinking about things like camera placement, and what are you showing people of the world that you're describing for an audience?
Yeah, there was an interesting experience trying to give, I think, viewers sort of the perspective, because I kept in mind that the lake was the person telling you the story. And so you always had to have some connection to it. So even if you're watching the pieces, we talk about, there's a place where a farmer he's harvesting his crop, and that used to be a lake bed. So it's like the lake needs to sort of like ever be present throughout the piece, is what I kept thinking of, or in proximity, can you see it? And just giving people just the time to experience the space and the contrast between some of these very dry, arid places where you find a dead camel, for instance, and comparing it to just the lush environment of the water and seeing the cattle coming out. You really wanted to see like the deep contrast between those two and how people are living in between that.
Yeah, I know that there were certainly some in, I guess VR itself is, comes in a certain challenge zone in terms of 3D making and a camera that essentially sees everything, and you sort of have to go somewhere else. I'd love to hear about sort of how you navigated that, I guess, if that's sort of quite different than your previous mode.
So one of my strategies, both in the first time and get everybody on the same page to what was happening in a 360 environment and what the camera could and couldn't see. And so I tried to show everyone being filmed, including the main characters, the people I was working with at the UN, just so that they understood, like, when we have to hide, they really believe, so it's good to get everyone on the same page. So that was one of the ways I navigated it too, so that they understood. And then sometimes you would place a camera and then go really far away and then come back and find that because it's 50 degrees, the camera has overheated and switched off. You don't know whether it like filmed the event you were looking for or what happened. That was interesting. I think the scariest bit was having to with the cattle and leaving the camera there, and I hid behind a bush. But then I was like, what if the cattle just knock over the camera? Then what happens? And it was just interesting watching all the camel walking up to the camera, looking very curiously, okay, and on with the way I was going. And none of them knocked down the camera. And I was like, okay, we made it. But I was trying to be really close just so that I could. And I think the other thing I wanted to try and do was actually do an underwater shot. I remember we talked about this, which we ended up animating. But I think if I really could have put a wetsuit on and taken a camera and gone underwater, I would have, because I think it would have just been so interesting to see all these different ways in which the lake manifests.
Mm. Now, Azubuya kind of has a different approach because it's all confined within one location. It's just a house. Was that a constraint to kind of expand what kind of story you could tell, given the importance of place in VR?
Yeah, I think that that really helped. I think logistically, having one location like that always really helps, right? So you don't have to move around. You don't have to pack up your gear in the middle of the day and go somewhere else, that kind of thing. So logistically, it worked great. And I really think that like indoor spaces also work really well in VR. And specifically, because you see like in, you go onto like property websites and they're all doing like houses, like you see like 360 stuff of houses. I think VR is really useful in terms of communicating what a space feels like. And that could be indoors or outdoors. But I think a house like that was really interesting using VR because of the details in this house that's been sitting empty for 20 years, a lot of that time with no windows or doors, and had different like levels of layers of history kind of happened to it, including vandalism and graffiti, just like nature coming in, like paint chipping off. And so now you have people who actually basically are making it livable again, but also who kind of want to keep some of that character in the house. So I thought it worked. I thought the medium worked really well in terms of communicating what it feels like to be in a house that has been sitting empty for so long with none of the fittings that you need to make a house comfortable, like windows and so on, and how people have kind of figured out ways of making it a comfortable space. And you only really get that sense from being inside the house and walking around it and feeling it for yourself.
I just want to take a quick moment to remind anybody who is joining us via our various channels today that you're also more than welcome to share any questions via chats. I'm sure that there's a lot of really interesting topics that our guests are exploring. So do feel free to add any more questions. So I guess the three of you both, well, you all have quite different artistic practices that all have sort of converged in this VR space. I think one commonality about all your work is that it's very reflective of the environments that you operate in and very sort of contemporary forms of African storytelling. But I'm really curious about what were some of the, I guess, benefits of your previous work and your kind of previous functions, and how that sort of has informed what is possible for you in the VR space. So I guess starting with you, Dylan, as a documentary filmmaker, I guess what are some of the ways that paved your way into VR storytelling?
Yeah, I think working in documentary, it's really interesting because you end up doing a lot for yourself, right? So because generally we work with low budgets and often you're between grants or that kind of thing. So you end up learning a lot of skills to kind of get through. As a director, you might actually do quite a few roles. And so I think that lends you as a filmmaker to be curious about different ways of working and different roles in a film set. So I think that really, I think that was useful in VR because I was really curious about how does this actually work, and I was really keen on just kind of getting a sense of how does a documentary even look in VR. I think before the Electric South workshop, I had no idea what that would even look like. Actually, just before I'd seen some of the Electric South films at Encounters in Joburg a few years ago, that was the first time I think I'd ever seen a VR film. So in terms of VR documentary, it was just something totally new to me. So I thought, I think that general kind of curiosity we have as documentary filmmakers really will stand you in good stead in VR because it is something that's still being worked out. I don't think it's a very established medium yet. Like you said, there's like a level. We're about to level up into like a next level of VR. So it's really exciting to be working in something as it's developing, whereas other forms of documentary or filmmaking have had a long time to develop and quite set in their ways. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. I hope I didn't just answer the question that I wanted to speak about.
Sometimes that's where the more interesting answers are, but I think it certainly does. And Nyasha, your work, I think, has a lot of commonalities with short form documentary as well, but you have a lot of experience working in kind of more of a traditional news cycle as well, and with some of the kind of sort of heavyweight gatekeepers who get to tell the stories about the world, institutions like the BBC. How does your work in journalism influence your work in VR?
Well, I think in some ways it was beneficial, but I actually sort of had to break free from the confines of like traditional journalism. I had to be way more creative. You would never write a poem for BBC. That's just the truth, And I think when we did the first draft, actually, of doing The Lakes Boys, it was very newsy. It was very prescriptive because I was coming from that background. And what I like about mixed reality is that you really just opens you up to all sorts of possibilities of things that you can do, which is that you wouldn't normally be able to do if you didn't get that shot, then that was just it. But then when we were in the edit, we were like, well, I'd really love for people to know what it's like to be underwater. And someone said, well, why don't we try create it? And do that with animation, which I'd never done before because I wasn't thinking in that way. And so for me, I think it's been a blessing to sort of break free of those confines in a way. But when it came to finalizing the piece, I was like, it's all well and good. People think it's beautiful and they've gone to Lake Chad and they've seen what it's like, but I need them to understand the gravity of the situation. And that's where the journalistic instinct kicks back in. I was like, I have to make sure. And in the end, one of a good friend of mine who's also worked in VR, Trevor Snap, he said, well, why don't you write an epilogue, which then gives people the facts that you actually want them to know, which is how many people are being infected by the Boko Haram insurgency, how many people are food insecure on the lake because of the environmental situation. Because I think it's really important for people to know that. And I think what was good is then going through the experience and seeing the epilogue afterwards, that people could take off the headset and say, wow, I watched this, piece and did you know this? And you should watch the piece because it's like told with the lake's voice. I think then that complements the artistry with the urgency by bringing in the urgency.
That's really interesting. So it's like there's a set of quantitative facts and information that's important, and these are the kind of like actionable things. But there's this other layer of being emotive and making that actually matter and making people care about it. And you sort of need the convergence of those two things.
Yeah, I definitely felt they needed to come together in the best way. So it was a bit tricky trying to figure that out, but we made our way through.
Yeah, you absolutely did. And so Jumoke, your background, I know you as a photographer and also, as a kind of cultural curator of many artists' work. What was it like for you stepping into both, I guess, 360 filmmaking, but also kind of more non-fiction documentary type approach of telling stories about real people in a very audiovisual way?
Yeah, I think for me it was interesting because aside from my photography background, I also have a literary background, because my major in school was actually English studies, so I started off writing poetry and things like that. So it was very interesting for me to be able to converge, all of this many things, for example, the idea to be able to sort of visually applying sort of like rules of thirds, all these many things in photography, and looking for ways to actually converge, into a 360 space, where it's spherical and everything is in view. And you have to think about, where each person is within the story. Background in photography helped me quite a lot in terms of the visualization of what I wanted Lagos at large to be. The fact that I've also walked a lot documenting the streets, it was very easy for me to also know specifically, the areas that I wanted to focus on in terms of my narration and storytelling. And also working with Njideka as well, because Njideka is a poet. As much as I write poetry, I wanted the story to be very personal. I wanted it to be not that she's reading what I have written, but something that she came up with based on her own personal experiences. So she wrote Peeling is Healing, an island flying to the top based on how she experienced the city. And that came across, very personal in the work. So I feel that invariably, what my background has done is giving me, it's made it a lot easier for me to interact with the city, and then also being able to articulate that visually as well. It's some of the things that I've been able to do. The convergence, from photography into a 360 space.
I have a question I want to open up to any of you. Fastest fingers first. What makes for a good story?
Good one, Caitlin. That's a tough one. But I'll give it a shot. But I think what makes a good story is something that you can unpack in layers. That's not obvious, right? That leaves people needing to talk about it afterwards, right? So that's something that still needs to be unpacked, and that has different levels to it. I guess. That was my best shot in the moment. So I hope that was good.
I think I can try. I agree with what Dylan said. The first thing I was going to say is journey, which is, I guess, unpacking at different stages. And I think something people can connect to, no matter where the story is, no matter who the story is about, a good story has to make me feel something.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know before you start telling the story that that's going to be the case, or is it something that you discover while you're making it?
Well, I think you usually know, because that's usually why we would do the stories. I think for most people, it's very hard to work on stories that don't make us feel anything. It's very hard to do that kind of work. So I think that's a given. It's just what's usually interesting is you don't know how other people are going to react to that story. I've watched people laugh at things that I never thought were funny and cry at scenes that never moved me because they just are experiencing it in a different way. I don't mind. It's just always interesting to see how people connect differently to things. And I think the important thing is to make sure there is a connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that rings true, for documentary as a form as a whole, or perhaps storytelling as a form as a whole, not, necessarily just specific to VR. VR space. Otherwise, it becomes a bit of a so what, we could look anywhere around us, but why, So I think that's really, element of connection seems really important. I want to shift gear a little bit. Or Jumoke, did you want to respond to that?
Yes. So I think for me, a good story has to, in a way, affect and then also has to connect. I think that's what I feel. And then the effect has to be either on an emotional level or at a level also maybe, psychological level, at a level as well. So I think it has to affect and also connect at the same time.
Absolutely. I'm going to shift gears and start talking a little bit more about the nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty of actual production and post-production and what that looks like. Seeing a few questions coming in from our audience as well, so I'm going to throw them into the mix as we go through this conversation. Celeste is asking us, for documentaries, if VR only works for kind of locations and an observational style, what are the limitations of VR in documentary?
Well, I was going to say, I don't think that's true that it only works for locations. I think what happens to be common in our pieces is that location is very important and the location is a character in itself, which is, I think, quite interesting. And I think maybe all of us are thinking about alternative characters when we're thinking about building our stories, which is how that happens. But I've seen some amazing pieces that are centered primarily on a character's journey and experience. An example is 4 Feet Blind, which is a sort of acted out series about a woman who's disabled in Argentina, I believe it is, and what her experience is of being in a wheelchair and how people see her and trying to go on a date. So she can eventually have sex. That's what she wants to do. And so you're seeing how she's trying to navigate this and setting the online date and doing different things. So I think I've seen some really powerful pieces where it's all about the character and not about the location. Yeah.
Yeah, I would echo what Nyasha is saying. I've also seen films that are pretty out there in terms of, so if you're thinking about limitations, there aren't that many, I would say. Like Nyasha was saying earlier, like when you were saying, oh, I wish I could, give the audience the experience of being underwater, you could just make it, right? Like, you can do an animation of it and immerse the audience in the animation. So, like I've seen a VR piece where you become a bug and you have 2 antennas and you're kind of flying through space. And I've seen stuff where you inside of an animation and you're physically floating in water. So I think Caitlin, you also saw this one by PRO, which was at Sundance, where you physically get into a pool at the hotel where Sundance was happening. And you put on an underwater headset, and the film is about space. It's like animation about space, very stylized, and you're literally floating, so you feel like you're in space and flying and sinking and doing all kinds of things. So yeah, I would say there aren't actually that many limited. It's actually quite a free space, and it's not just limited to also like I was mentioning about physical spaces, built environment. I think they're done well, but you could really shoot anything and make it captivating. And I think story is really important. So it's really good that we spoke about that and kind of thinking about what makes a good story, because that's really at the heart of it. Because it's kind of novelty experience, but if you actually immerse somebody in an actual story and a journey that takes them somewhere with captivating visuals that immerse something, it can be a really amazing experience.
Yeah, I think that something that you're bringing up, Dylan, is just how broad the canvas is. You're really talking about essentially sensory stimulation of people in all kinds of ways. Instead of purely just a 2D screen that exists in front of you, there's all kinds of ways of, I guess, broadening a mode of storytelling that can engage, your visual spectrum all around you, but also allow you, to embody, put your physical body within these virtual environments. And then you get all kinds of interesting stuff going on in terms of, smell perception or kind of tactile installation. So it's a broad canvas. I'd like to, I guess, just hone down a little bit more specifically on your project. You've all used elements of 360 filmmaking. So what that specifically is a camera with multiple lenses that sees in multiple directions. And in some ways has a lot of parallels to traditional filmmaking. Kind of goes through a traditional post-production timeline and editing software that you've also, some of your projects have brought in elements of animation. I'd love if each of you can just describe briefly kind of what are the tools that were used on your projects from start to finish. Should we start with Jumoke?
Thanks, Caitlin. So I think for me, we use sort of elements of 360. Also, we did a lot of soundscaping as well, where we, and then also we incorporated sort of layering, of the images, which is something that was very experimental, so we'll take aspects, of a recording and layer it onto another aspect. So those were like the basic things that we used in our production.
Yeah, what were the kind of? Yeah, no, absolutely. I wonder if you can get more specific about the post-production, because I know that you were working in kind of traditional like 2D filmmaking, editing software, but you also I think did a little bit of work in a game engine, or at least we're exploring that option for some of your animation.
Okay, so we the animation, actually we ended up just using 2D animation because graphic assets, was a bit challenged in terms of transitioning to 3D. So what we did was it was basically 2D animation done with Adobe, and then we just then took that, from Adobe, onto, a 360 space. So the animation was created in 2D for this particular experience.
And Dylan, you're obviously very experienced in working in the film world. How did the tools that you use kind of compare to that process for you? Where were the differences and similarities?
It was actually relatively similar to processes I normally work in, which I was surprised by, I must say. But I will also say I didn't shoot it myself, right? So you actually shot it, kid. So you were really good at the camera. And it was kind of cool because I was learning it while you were filming it, right? So, and you were kind of like showing me this is how it works, blah, 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 blah. So it was like working with a camera person, like you would normally work, but this particular camera was just kind of different. So it couldn't be if you didn't want to be in the shot, you can't be in the room. So in terms of so doing interviews pose interesting challenges of like how I would normally do interviews. You'd sit with somebody and talk to them. So we had to be in the next room, and then I'd poke my head around the corner and be like, "Hey, so could you tell me about how you started occupying this house?" I'd run out of space, and those kinds of things were different, but it was also fun. Like it because it was kind of strange for me. Like the whole documentary experience is generally quite strange for somebody who's being filmed. So us and the participants were kind of feeling it out together. So it kind of, I liked how it created this very horizontal feeling in the filming process, because we weren't this kind of imposing film crew with like the set way of working and kind of talking to each other in what probably sounds like code if you're not, part of it. And so it was I really enjoyed the shooting process. And the editing process also very similar in terms of working with an editor. So we worked with Stephen Abbott. And so he knew how to use that, like the software for 360 stuff. So we kind of generally cut it the way we would cut a documentary, except we used much longer shots to allow time and space for people to be able to choose the shots for themselves within that shot, right? So people would be looking around a room, be like, okay, here's the window, what's going on here? So you have to give them time to do that. And so it was a slower, more meditative approach to editing. But I generally approach the edit the way I normally would do, which I would edit the content first of the interviews and do like a paper edit, figure out where everything would go before we get into the edit with Stephen. And it was great. For me, it was like kind of like being in school again, because I was new to this form of editing as well. So it was like you also had to think about where the orientation of the globe is. So are you going to start here? Are you going to have the audience start here? Or are you going to have them start here, over there? So that's also like a difference. But I actually found that it really works well in the documentary, because I kind of have I've had like a kind of observational style combined with the expository style, right? And I think that these kinds of cameras work really well for observational, because I always felt very awkward being in a room filming somebody in their daily life. Like I made a film once about a guy who comes out of prison, and we were at his house when he came home for the first time to see his mom. And we were just in the corner, like holding the cameras and stuff and being like, oh, just pretend we're not here, we're not in the room, we're not here, which is never true. You always kind of affect the feeling in the room by your presence. And I think, like you still have a camera in the room that still changes the room, but your physical presence is not there. And I think that does remove a bit of that layer of you imposing your presence in the room and your kind of gaze. I think it's easier for people to forget in an observational setting that they're being watched. So those are some of the pros and cons I think that I found. But I would say I really enjoyed working in that way. I think it lends itself well to observational stuff, but with challenges as well.
Yeah. In terms of tools and production workflows, Nyasha, I think you were extremely ambitious because you were shooting in a country where you can't just rent a VR camera. You also wanted to take a drone with you. So can you talk a little bit more about what was in your backpack when you got on a flight?
Yes, every producer who's worked with me knows I try to do the most. So we went, luckily we were working with the Black Rhino team in Nairobi, who are a VR outfit here, and they had an Obsidian camera that I took with me. But then I also wanted to do, because I was obsessed with all these different angles of the lake, wanted to have, so underneath the lake, I've told you about being in a wetsuit, and then around the lake, the dry beds, and then I wanted to have this aerial shot of the lake. And so we managed to, got a drone, a DJI drone in Nairobi, got this rig to set up, I think it was the Kodak 360 cameras, to put on top and below the drone. And I remember I was in Joburg at the time, and my brother and I had to drive to like a different province to go pick up the cardboard printed casings that would then be mounted onto the camera. So it was a Pan-African attempt, definitely, at that effort. And then we flew the drone, which at one point malfunctioned and just fell through the sky. Like, thankfully not into the lake, but just like at the, what else happened? It was an interesting experience, and somehow security, they didn't flag for coming in with all of this gear. But it was challenging because I am used to shooting my own days, but I was really just by myself trying out stuff and then texting you when things weren't working out. So it was a quite an intense week of when we did it. And then additional post stuff is because obviously I didn't go underwater. We created the animation, which was an interesting experience because at first the fish were too big and then they were too small and then there was something too slowly, then there was something too fast. And poor Stephen, he was a 3D artist who did it, who was really, really great in terms of trying to navigate what I wanted. And then sadly, when it came to the drone shot, just because of the resolution of the Kodak cameras didn't match, like the difference between 4K and 8K was just so like vast when you put the piece on the headset. They say kill your babies. And so I had to go of those drone shots. And you remember that experience and how sad I was at letting go, because I was like, I've been through all this effort. I lifted the drone after it fell through the sky. You know, you think about all those things, and I think all filmmakers think about the things they suffered to get. And the audience doesn't know that you suffered, but you feel like it's validation for it to make it into the piece, because you're like, I went through hell and back to get this. And Caitlin, you're a great producer, and we're like, Nyasha, no. This is just not going to work. The piece will be better for it. And so we ended up changing the piece to not have that. So I think those are the logistical dramas I encountered.
Yeah, I mean, I think what doesn't make it into the final piece, I think somehow does still make it into your arsenal. Like, as your expertise as a filmmaker now, you know, the next drone shoot you need to be on, you know, you sort of leveled up, right? And you can take that expertise into your next project, which I guess brings up my next question, which is around the urgency of adding new skills to your qualifications, I guess, to your expertise as storytellers. We see, you know, the world is changing very rapidly around us, and technologies are growing. Is it really important to be embracing new technologies, or is sort of, you know, just a passion of yours that is, you know, isn't necessarily an imperative for all documentary storytellers?
Okay, I'll go first. I would actually consider myself a late adopter of technology in general. I don't like to buy the latest thing. I'm very skeptical. So I think with VR, I had to see it, you know, work a few times before I was sold on the impact it could have. And I just watched some really beautiful pieces where I was like, this is the medium. And then I could imagine it in another, and I was like, no, this is the way that it has to go. I think it's good to experiment. I think the industry, especially of documentary, has been very formulaic. And over the years is starting to grow and expand, for instance, in different ways. Like, you see more people who are normally behind the camera being in front of the camera and explaining why they're doing this. You're seeing people using different technologies, using animation. I mean, now in the time of COVID, we're going to see a lot more content of characters filming themselves and us not even being there. And then how do you tell a story when we're not even in the room? You've never even met the character. So I think we're going to see, even now, because of the pandemic, new ways of people adopting technology, turning the camera on themselves or turning the camera on things they normally wouldn't have. And also in a way, I think it's quite good because I'm also seeing a lot more people being empowered to tell their own stories and use technology, whatever they have access to tell their own stories, because there isn't the same level of hopping around and moving the way it was before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, like Nyasha saying, like, I'm not much of a gear guy. Like, I don't really care much for like the latest cameras and stuff like that. But for me, working in this medium was super exciting also because it opens up new possibilities for African filmmakers, I think, because there are new programs, new showcases, and because it's a small community, it's another, it's kind of like you can break through a little bit easier than as if you were a documentary filmmaker, like in the feature documentary world, for example. In there internationally is obviously quite hard. So there are all these kind of opportunities, I think, for African filmmakers, also in terms of even in terms of decolonizing storytelling, if you will. So thinking about new ways of storytelling or going back to more ancient relations and incorporating those into VR, which is what a lot of the conversations at Electric South became about. Was like, how do we incorporate some of this kind of traditional storytelling into this? And I think that's really exciting also because VR doesn't have that kind of colonial baggage that normal has. So, when we study cinema in film school, they knew about stuff like Birth of the Nation because it was a breakthrough film, techniques that are still used today in feature films, right, and in documentary. But also it was like a racist film that glorified the KKK and slavery. But because it was a groundbreaking film, you can't not study it, you can't not look at it. So I think that's what's exciting about being part of this stuff, being an African filmmaker and interested in colonizing, is that you can be part of this new chapter in moving images and storytelling, digital storytelling. So I think in that sense, it's really cool to get involved. And for me, as kind of not a techie phobe, but I had to kind of get over this idea of, I had a reaction to kind of feel, I was like, why would our normal documentary is not good enough? Like, why do I need to put people in the thing? But actually, yeah, it's different. There's something different about it. It's worth playing around with different things and trying stuff out because it's changing all the time and you might enjoy it. So, try it out.
So, Katie, I think for me, it's been quite a journey. I think, first of all, I love the idea of the collaboration. The Nisi 3D team were the ones in charge of my production. And they basically handled, we had a cinematographer, Joey, because at the end of the day, we had just one camera to work with, which was the Insta360 Pro, and we knew that if we lost that camera, that was going to be the end of the project. So we had to come to a decision at the start of the project that we didn't have insurance, we didn't even have enough funding to actually work on this project. So we had to ensure that Joey pretty much handled the camera, especially because the first day that we actually shot, which was at one of the locations at Jazz Hall, the camera, that was like our first introduction, into it. Like the camera literally fell. And it was like a very scary moment for all of us. Like we screamed and we were like, I almost had a heart attack that day. So it was our first day shooting. And from then on, Joey handled the camera. There were times that we even had to take the camera off the tripod so he could hold it on his head, so he could shoot some of the spaces, especially in the market space. So you sort of have that experience that you're moving, through, the market space or getting onto the Moonweb bus, and things like that. So we have to, in a way, improvise a lot. I think for me, what VR does is it opens up possibilities. It's also, as Dylan has said, everybody's starting. There's there's historical baggage, with the medium. We're all starting, sort of like at the same time globally, and people are sort of learning on the go. And things that I did on this project as well, learning a lot of things that would work. Even it was very much a very traditional person, and he didn't think about possibilities of working. I tried to connect him to you at some point, Caitlin, but he just refused because he said it was going to take too much time, probably months. Working, on a 3-minute animation. I didn't want to dedicate the time to it. So there's also sort of like that, in a way, questioning, also in a way, people comfortable, experimenting with the medium at this point. Especially people used to working in sort of like traditional formats, or things like that. So I think over time, I see the possibilities. I also like the idea that you have the freedom of all sort of combining many different elements as well. And I love the fact that even doing animation in 3D, we found a way, to sort of incorporate it into the experience as well. So for me, I think the guys, 3D, Joey, Osarume and stuff, really did a lot of work in terms of the production and the post-production, great deal, in terms of also introducing me into the medium and also engage within the medium as well. Obviously, Caitlin, I had this sort of dynamic idea, when we started the project and I wanted to do this and that, but you helped me in a way shape my thinking, to say, okay, this is not realistic because it's going to cost a lot. At some point, we wanted to also incorporate sort of like a drone as well, but it was impossible, to sort of do that because it was quite expensive. So I think in a way it's kind of like an ongoing thing. For me, it's been a great experience going into this form of storytelling.
Yeah, I think for me, my role as a producer is often just the person who says no. It's often not fun, but I think in some ways imposing those constraints really gets you deep into what really matters and what's really important outside of all the bells and whistles. I think what all three of you have done in a really phenomenal way is embrace wearing a lot of different hats and be very sort of in the driver's seat of these projects, getting them made and taking on a lot of different skill sets in order to do that. But at the same time, none of these projects were individualistic. They all required a team and kind of collaborators in order to make that happen. And I'd love to hear more from you about how do you think about building those networks of collaborators? And I'll also just bring up a question from one of our attendees, Nokwanda Shabangu, who's asking, aside from Electric South, which as I mentioned is an incubator for new media storytelling based in Cape Town, but with a Pan-African focus. Aside from us, what other collaborators could a storyteller get in touch with to explore various equipments and to shoot in VR? I'll expand a bit and strategy to how you've built a team and built access to resources you needed to tell these stories. And what advice would you give for other folks who want to kind of bootstrap projects?
Okay, my advice would be, and which is what I did, is I had gone to the Electric South lab in 2018, which is when I first pitched the story. Then I went and workshopped it a bit, and then started to realize this is going to cost a lot because Chad is not next door, and just the nature of VR, sometimes it can get expensive very quickly just on the gear side. Who could be partners? And I think I'm learning this not just in the VR world, but in all the films that I've worked with. So you got to find, it takes a village to make a film. And you have to build the village. And even because I came from you shoot, direct, produce, you do everything yourself, I had to learn to build a team and work with other people. So I had Caitlin, I think you were the first team member, and then I went to Black Rhino VR, which was a VR outfit in Nairobi, and showed them a pitch deck and said, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Would you guys be interested in any way? And then they loved the idea and said, okay, sure, what do you need? And then that's when they were able to come on board with the camera gear and with doing the beginning of the post-production process, the stitching, putting the footage together. So my advice would be is to sort of build that village, get people who believe in the story, excited about the story, who can then contribute and pull resources together to help you make the work.
Yeah, I would echo that that answer as well. It's really important to build that team around you, and to make contact with people like Electric South, for example, and to apply to these kinds of labs, because that's a great way to enter into it, because people also just trying to get people within the kind of XR community also trying to get more people into it, trying to build collaborators, networks of collaborators, and also audiences. So people are quite open and keen to start the conversation and share ideas and resources. So yeah, it's all about just collaborating with the right people and and experimenting.
Do you have anything to add to that, Jumoke?
As Inyasha said, it takes a village to actually do it. And on Lagos at Large, we had first of all Electric South, with Caitlin, helping shape the story. Then there's also the Misi 3D team as well, who helped sort of in the production and the post production. We actually worked locally majorly, and then we also worked with Sebastian as well, who did the animation. There's Inchudeka, who had to shuttle between Lagos, and Vienna, because she was living in Vienna at the time. So it was also she was pregnant, so it was also kind of very tricky, sort of juggling all of this many elements as well. But I think what this experience has taught me is the idea to let go. I think that was the first stage for me, to not be so to let go and to be able to kind of sort of like work in a collaboration as well, especially coming, from a photography background where I was basically doing everything myself, including post-production, editing, and all of that, So I had to learn to also allow people sort of do their thing without, interfering too much, but also at the same time sort of maintaining, my original ideas, and also sort of having, this back and forth in terms of what can work and what technology is able to do at this point in time, So I think it was very important for me and that was a great experience for me. And I think going forward now, I love, the idea of collaboration, because it brings so many beautiful elements and people are bringing in so many ideas, and that in itself adds, to what eventually becomes, the product, which in its case was Lagos at Large.
Thanks, Jumoke. And thank you as well to the folks who've been asking questions in our chat. I'll just flag that we've got about 15 minutes left of this panel. So if anybody's watching on on Facebook or YouTube, or anyone wants to get in any last minute questions, now's your chance. So I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about just sort of macro things that are going on both in the world of VR and then just in the world of production in general. So one thing that I think is maybe a bit of a concern for filmmakers who've entered the space of 360 production is sort of what the future of that particular medium is going to look like. So what we've seen recently happen is Oculus, one of the big VR headset brands, has discontinued a particular type of VR headset, which is called Oculus Go, which allows for sort of 3 degrees of freedom watching. And it was sort of the lowest price point headset, was used very extensively in a lot of screening contexts for distribution, because you could, various distributors could buy reasonably buy a great deal of them and show this type of work. But we're seeing, I guess, a shift in Facebook, who owns Oculus, into kind of a more kind of interactive style of content, and traditionally or typically projects that are built in kind of game engine environments rather than shot with 360 cameras. On the other hand, you see kind of spaces like, Sundance Film Festival. They have sort of an installation section of virtual reality projects that are quite interactive, and sort of mixed reality projects that have some kind of physical, artistic installation in combination with some kind of technological, immersive experience. And they actually separated out a cinema section for 360 films on its own. And so in some ways, it sort of justifies this as an artistic medium in and of itself. 360 films being projects that you can look all around in all directions, but don't necessarily have volume. So you can't navigate through the space, walk through the environment as an audience member. 360 filmmaking is in some ways one of the most accessible ways of getting into VR because it's kind of mirroring a lot of the world of filmmaking, and some of the tools are quite accessible. So given that we're not really sure what the future of 360 filmmaking is, I'd love to ask you all, is it important that 360 survives, or can we just see it as a stepping stone toward, between a 2D world of film and TV and, some kind of more immersive thing in the future?
Okay, I'll go ahead and give it a go. Well, yeah, I think you kind of answered what I would say, why I would say it is important that it survives, because 360 is way more accessible. Even if like you have access to a festival like Sundance that has the capabilities of hosting kind of volumetric or the exhibition-based work where you're physically stepping into a space and walking around, where it's mapped out to your body and things like that. Even then, it's really hard to see those pieces because only a couple of people at a time can go into that space and experience it without bumping into each other or that kind of thing. And so I think 360, it's really important that it survives because you could even view it on a cell phone and a really cheap headset that you just slide your cell phone into. And we know on the continent, cell phone penetration is really high. So like a lot of Africans have smartphones, and it's growing all the time. And so 360 and also augmented reality, I think are really, it's important to us, I think, that it survives because it's a great way for us to be able to distribute our work on the continent and get people to see it, at like a wider audience to see it. But yeah, who knows what, it's hard to tell where it's going to go, I would say. I have no idea.
Well, I'm thinking that because now, we're kind of living some sort of post-pandemic realities, and a lot of things happening at the moment is also kind of nudging us, to a virtual dependency, as sort of like the future, of consuming art, and things like that. So I think now more than ever, there's probably a need for the medium to actually stay, and also to kind of to think about ways to make it more accessible, maybe the mobile format, because at this point, I think in terms of production, there's still a bit of challenge in terms of equipment for producers, on the continent to have access, to funding and also to equipment. But then also beyond production as well, in the distribution as well, there's this sort of limitation in terms of access, to headgears and things like that. So, I mean, the price point, even for the cheapest one, is still quite expensive when you think about, in terms of the buying power, that most Africans in the continent have, So I think in that sense, it's just sort of like to begin to think about more ways, to make the medium accessible. And I think the mobile format, as Dylan has said, is probably a way to go. Because everyone already has a mobile phone, so possibly an application that allows, all of this, many things, or probably even, sort of, and also Netflix is also something they're doing quite well and also easily accessible as well, and they have a mobile format. So if you think about platforms such as that, in terms of distribution would also be a great way to get it across to most people on the continent. So I think for me, I'm thinking it's probably here to stay, especially because of some of the realities of the ongoing pandemic. And it's just basically thinking about how to make the formats more accessible on the continent.
Yeah, you definitely bring up a good point that we are very much in a pandemic mode right now, and none of us, really know how that's going to unfold and the implications. It's certainly pushing and pulling use of technology in different directions, as we, are witnessing by having this panel in this kind of virtual format. And the word virtual itself is, taken on a new meaning in 2020 outside of the world of virtual reality itself. So, given that we don't know what comes next, I would love to hear your hopes and ambitions for your future work, each of you, and where you see either virtual reality or other forms of new media storytelling fitting into your career paths going ahead.
I think for me, it's, I think I've found home in sort of like the extended reality space, because it allows me, to sort of express my, my creativity, fully, it allows me to tell sort of full stories. And that way, I think I've sort of found home. Currently, I'm already working on a collaborative piece, which we're just sort of like at the conceptualization stage. And it's going to be augmented reality. We're also sort of exploring this idea of, creating an application, so that it's readily accessible to, in terms of distribution, as well. So I think for me, I think I found home in sort of like, and I'm hoping to just sort of see, the many possibilities. I've seen the limitations in terms of consuming virtual reality. That's a bit limited, obviously getting it across, even with the Google Cardboard is still a little bit tricky, and people don't have the full experience, and things like that. So I want to then try augmented reality and see if that's a possibility, and maybe that would probably work better in terms of creating easier access, to my work.
Yeah, I look forward to see what you make. How about you, Dylan?
Yeah, I feel very similarly to Jumoke in that it's definitely the medium that I want to work in going forward, in addition to traditional documentary or flat screen documentary stuff. I'd love to kind of also work in the kind of physical installation-based work where you can actually walk around in virtual space with your whole body instead of just spinning around in a 360 way. And I'd love to experiment with all that stuff. And I think starting with working in 360 as an entry point is great, because it's really opened me up to all these different ways of working and being able to see stuff like that. And in that way, getting inspired to figure out how to do more with the medium. I think also with documentary, what I'll say in closing for me is that I feel like VR and 360 is also really useful in terms of really creating a heightened sense of empathy. So if you're doing some kind of targeted work that's kind of maybe attached to a campaign, or you're trying to move a decision maker on something, you can really put them inside of that situation. For example, like if you're dealing with a correctional services official, you can put them inside a crowded prison cell and show them what it feels like to be in there with all those guys, for example, right? And so I think I'd also like to start thinking about it in those ways and using the medium in more targeted ways, because at the moment it's hard for it to be seen by a large group of people in the traditional distribution sense in our context in South Africa, right? So but it can be used in very powerful pointed ways. But yeah, there's all kinds of possibilities. So I'm just excited to learn more.
Yeah, that really does seem to be the key, is kind of maintaining curiosity and a willingness to embrace a new medium and explore what that means for story.
Yeah.
Nyasha, what does VR look like in your career going forward?
I think I'm still interested, particularly again, also with the installation space, just because I think there's an opportunity to see more installations physically move to different locations and reach wider audiences, which is currently the challenge that we're having in content that's created in the headspace space. So I think for me, that's where I'm interested in going towards, and what I hope to see in general in the industry is just, and across the board in other fields, whether it's fiction, journalism, documentary, is just a democratization of the storytelling process. I'm hoping that I'll see more of that, because I think that also adds to then what audiences come with that democratization, because currently things are very concentrated to specific individuals. Even like in Africa, for instance, it's concentrated to specific areas where there is a company that works in VR, but there's 54 countries. And so how do we make sure that the kind of content that we're creating in mixed reality spaces can be seen across?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up that there's both the challenge in the creation itself, in the companies where they're based, and who gets access to the tools in order to tell these stories. And then also the other side of that, who gets to watch them, and how do we kind of build networks and distribution networks where folks can see what's going on. And the installation context, which in 2020, the idea of being in a crowded room with other people and sharing a device that you strap to your face feels increasingly strange. So we'll see, I guess, how it unfolds. And I think, as Dylan was saying, like having this kind of open mindset to learn and to embrace kind of to change and sort of see where these new technologies and the new industry kind of serve storytelling seems like the right mode to be in to kind of hopefully embrace like where it's good. We are pretty much at time, so I want to thank you three for joining us today. It's been really a treat to hear about all of your different production stories and kind of ways that you're thinking about virtual reality, and also just to have you all in the same virtual space together. Really is a meeting of very brilliant minds. I want to thank also the Encounters team, obviously, for hosting these panels. I know that there's some really great other topics of discussion coming up. So I'd encourage everybody who's watching to check out the rest of the lineup and watch some films coming up. I guess that my parting words to everybody would just be, for all the creators, I guess, who are watching, I guess there's a real urgency to capturing our stories and sharing them and sort of finding our shared humanity. So I just encourage you all to really just be bold and be curious and stake your claim you're interested in pursuing. And hopefully, VR is on some of your lists. And I will leave it there. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. Thanks to the Encounters team as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and everyone enjoy the rest of the festival.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thanks.
Hi.
Your turn.
Okay, it looks like a few of you guys have left. Oh, they're Hey Asha. Thank you. How was that for you guys? It was great from our side.
It was great. It was nice to chat. It was nice to have a good conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it was really great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It was also great to